Welcome back to Inside Story. Well, despite a fortune being spent in Afghanistan by the international community on reconstruction, civilized daily life is a distant dream for many Afghans. A staggering half of all children, mostly girls, still get no schooling whatsoever. And 1 in 5 children still dies before the age of 5. Overall life expectancy just 46, and that's one of the very lowest rates in the world. Well, that's just for those living at home, because Afghanistan still has the highest number of refugees in the world, around about 3 million of them in neighbouring Iran and Pakistan alone. Within Afghanistan itself, according to the United Nations, more than 200,000 people are currently displaced from their homes. Well, the Afghan government gets billions of dollars in development aid. We've gone over that to some extent, but many Afghans, well, they wonder where the money's gone. This is what some people in Kabul had to say about how the government's handled foreign aid.
I think the money has not been spent through the proper channels. It should have been given to the government to spend, and instead it went through foreign NGOs, and they did not meet our expectations.
The government hasn't helped the people. Look at the prices, they're very high. A government employee is paid only $50 or $60. What should they buy first with that money? Flour, oil, wood, or medicine for their children? You can make nothing out of it.
When I find work, I'll work as hard as a donkey till the evening, and I get $2 to $3. What kind of help do I get from the government? I see no changes, except the poor have become poorer.
Let's go straight to Washington, D.C. Caroline Wadhams from the Center for American Progress, written a great deal about the situation in Afghanistan, talking about where the aid money goes. They're interesting, to me at least, that only 1/60th of the money that's come in so far has gone on promoting agricultural projects. And that, when everybody's so dismissive of the fact that the poppy cultivation and the opium trade has gone soaring through the roof. Why is so little spent on trying to encourage farmers to do something else?
I think that the U.S. government has had a focus on eradication as their main method for dealing with the drug problem versus dealing with targeting the high-level traffickers, in interdiction, targeting the warehouses and the labs. They've had sort of the wrong focus, I think, from the beginning. And one thing that we've been trying to recommend from our organization, the Center for American Progress, is really much more focused, not on the farmers themselves, but on getting those high-level traffickers. We've created also, in certain cases, perverse incentives where we've put some of the money, the economic aid, into the opium areas and not into the opium-free provinces. And I think that's been another strange approach that we've had.
This is precisely the point that a lot of people are making, that you need to spend money on rural development, no matter where it is, because half of Afghanistan's population depends on that.
I agree. And I think that largely we haven't, I mean, the U.S. government especially has just not been focused on economic development across the board. The U.S. government has really had a focus on military solutions for these problems and has not, they're starting to make this shift, but they have not been focused on the state building, on the economic development issues, which are so important for defeating the insurgency, for standing up the government, and for creating stability in the long term in Afghanistan.
Caroline there mentions security. Matt Waldman from Oxfam in Kabul. One of the things that you write about is something called community peace building, how that would be much more effective than simple military solutions. And you say it works in Kenya. Give us an idea of what you mean.
Well, what community peace building is about is working with the institutions of Afghanistan that have existed for centuries. And they're councils of elders. They're known as shuras or jirgas in Afghanistan. And they really have this central authority in Afghan lives, particularly in rural areas. And what this is about is helping those institutions to work better, to be able to resolve disputes more effectively, and to provide stability in communities. And the important thing here is that development can take place when there is stability in communities. And indeed, a lot of instability in Afghanistan comes from local insecurity and has local causes. So that's why peace building is so important. But it also has a relevance to the wider conflict because the Taliban and other parties to the conflict exploit local insecurity for their own purposes in the wider conflict.
Caroline Wadhams, I'm going to bring you back in again here, then I'll go back to Chris Alexander in Kabul, because I understand you've got to disappear, Caroline. Does what Matt says there mean that the West has been trying to impose its values rather than understanding the values that have existed for centuries?
Well, I think that one thing that has been flawed in the U.S. approach and maybe in the international community's approach is that we have not done enough consultations with the Afghan people in the way that we're approaching Afghanistan. We have not adhered to a lot of the priorities that have been established by the Afghan government, like the Afghanistan Compact, which set out a whole outline for priorities and how to achieve development objectives. I think we've often also, the U.S. government has often marginalized the Afghan government in terms of funding, but in terms of coordinating with them. I think that there has been just a lack of consultation generally with Afghans in our mission there.
Caroline Wadhams, thanks very much indeed. Thanks for being with us. I know you've got to rush off. Let's go back to Chris Alexander in Kabul. Talking about involving the Afghan government, giving people incentives. I'm going to go back to something else I discovered that was written shortly after the Bonn Agreement. Human Rights Watch said we need to devise training and job programs that will make life more attractive to young men than becoming a soldier in the army of a warlord. And I think you could then put stroke Taliban, given what's happened in the last year or so. Has that happened?
Job creation is a huge challenge. There haven't been enough. There is economic vibrancy here. Economic growth is going to be 13.5% this year, but a lot of the jobs are part-time. They don't have that perspective of career, of advancement, and it's really a challenge of formalizing small and medium enterprises, bringing more investment to Afghanistan that's going to change that. And recently this announcement of the award of a huge copper deposit south of Kabul, which could lead to a $3 to $4 billion investment in the mining industry, is one of the first signs that situation might change, and that the largely rural population of this country does have the perspective of working in industries, in sectors that are linked to the global economy and that are sustainable.
There's a certain economic vibrancy that I see when I go to Kabul. There are large houses that belong to just a very few people. There are TV stations that make enormous profits for very few people. And I also meet people who are professionally trained who have to work as interpreters to earn just a fraction of the money they should be getting. Does that make you feel that there's an inequality that can ever be satisfied?
The inequality is real, but it needs to be satisfied. Afghans have a strong sense of egalitarianism. The jirgas that we were talking about are based on that principle. It was a jirga that gave President Karzai his first legitimacy inside the country, and that gave the country its constitution. It's going to take balanced economic growth to make people happy. And as you mentioned, rural development is key to that. But it's also a question of spreading the benefits of education and skill development equitably, and also linking Afghanistan to the global economy, because ultimately it's going to be trade with neighboring countries and investment from abroad as combined with Afghanistan's own resources that are going to bring prosperity to this country.
You and I last met in Kabul in May. We've seen constant suicide attacks, bomb attacks, all sorts of unrest in the country since then. Are you more hopeful now than you were when we met in the spring?
There's still an edge here. There's still a security challenge. But I am more confident because the violence has not grown much this year. In fact, what has grown is the ability of the government and its international partners to meet the challenge of insecurity. There have been fewer suicide attacks in this country, quite frankly, than we expected. The overall number for this year won't be much higher than last year. And our ability to conduct counterinsurgency operations led by the Afghans, but with strong international support, is improving.
All right.
So I wouldn't want to make predictions about next year, but I think one can be hopeful that the cause of peace is going to be supported here strongly.
Well, given the fact that 2007 has apparently been the bloodiest year since the invasion by American troops and the fall of the Taliban, goodness knows what you were expecting if you think this hasn't been such a bad year. But thanks, Chris Alexander from the UN, for joining us. Thank you, Matt Waldman from Oxfam.
We were expecting worse.
I'm sorry to hear that. And thank you for joining us here on this edition of Inside Story. Goodbye.